Look at these people wandering around with absolutely no idea what's about to happen.
But this is what I really want you to hear, because it's not me saying it. This would be, if you only share this slide with your family and friends, they need to hear this. And by the way, the link for this entire, I think, 3.5 hour meeting is below. But you also have just the snippet links as well, because the FDIC bankers discuss bail-ins to deal with impending market collapse.
Accessible when people need to know, but I don't think you have much hope of reaching a public that doesn't have a professional need to know.
Yeah, why do you need to know
I completely
this?
agree with that. I almost think you'd scare the public if you put this out. Like, why are they telling me this? Should I be concerned about my bank? Like, my insurance company doesn't tell me what they're doing with my assets. They just assume they're going to pay my claim, right? I think you've got to think of the unintended consequences of taking a public that has more full faith and confidence in the banking system than maybe people in this room do.
And that's the FDIC.
We want them to have full faith and confidence in the banking system. They know the FDIC insurance is there. They know it works. They put their money in. They're going to get their money out. So there's a select crowd of people that are in the institutional side. And if they
Should be accessible when people need to know, but I don't think you have much hope of reaching a public that doesn't have a professional need to know.
I completely agree with that. I almost think you'd scare the public if you put this out. Like, why are they telling me this? Should I be concerned about my bank? Like, my insurance company doesn't tell me what they're doing with my assets. They just assume they're going to pay my claim, right? I think you've got to think of the unintended consequences of taking a public that has more full faith and confidence in the banking system than maybe people in this room do. That we want them to have full faith and confidence in the banking system. They know the FDIC insurance is there. They know it works. They put their money in. They're going to get their money out. So there's a select crowd of people that are in the institutional side. And if they want to understand this, they're going to find a way to understand this. There's a bunch of law firms represented in this room. There's a bunch of people that will charge them by the hour a lot of money to explain this all to them. And it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And they all have huge staffs. But I would be careful about the unintended consequences of starting to blast too much of this out in the general public.
Tests of whether you're being heard. And I think about TLAC. So TLAC should respond to good and bad news about the institutions. And it's really important. I mean, it's a little bit conflicted, right? I mean, it's important that people understand they can be bailed in, but you don't want a huge run on the institution. But they're going to be. And it could be an early warning signal to the FDIC and the primary regulators when these things happen. And there may be some other prices. This is similar to what Jay was saying in the market, that you can tell whether people understand who's going to be protected, who isn't going to be protected. It would be, I think, an interesting study to look at the evolution of market prices in a situation like March of 2020, for example, and see whether people understood what might happen.
To some of Dick's early comments, I do think it is hard to get a lot of demand for transparency right now in this sort of period of peacetime. But that is going to flip, and it's going to flip probably even faster than we saw in 2008, where the need for communications really quickly in the social media world to avoid disinformation, to have some holding patterns for things like, I remember in the early days of bail-in, people saying they're coming for my deposits, right? So just holding communications that you can pull out that are helpful to deal with disinformation, some very simple things, and how quickly you'll be able to deal with different constituencies. For example, as liabilities are further up and closer to harm's way, when are you going to be able to give them some comfort, if any? How do you deal with foreign operations? How do you communicate to some of those different groups? I think ex-ante preparation for the speed of scaling up and the ability to get information out to avoid rumors taking over the narrative strikes me as probably the place that feels like it's got the most.
States has officially hit its debt ceiling of $31.4 trillion. The news was announced today in a letter from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to Congress.
And now a live look at the Capitol, where Congress is digging in on what to do next. Hitting the debt ceiling means the U.S. has reached the legal limit with which it can borrow to pay the bills that Congress has already authorized. CBS correspondent Nicole D'Antonio joins us live from Washington with more on how this standoff is putting a strain on the economy. Nicole.
Well, Jim, Marie, when we talk about the debt ceiling, this is money the U.S. already spent and now it's due, just like a credit card. But the Treasury Secretary says, and she warns that this is now she's having to use extraordinary measures to pay the bills.
Hardware store owner Bill Hart says he's worried about the impact the debt ceiling could have on his business and its 50 employees.
It is a big responsibility when you're responsible for this many people's livelihoods and families.
The Treasury Department says today is the day the nation has reached its debt ceiling limit, the legal limit with which it can borrow to pay the country's bills. The department has begun taking extraordinary measures to prevent from defaulting on debt, including shifting money between accounts, as well as temporarily holding off on payments to some federal employee retirement plans and health funds for retired postal workers. That gives Congress until June 5th to raise the debt ceiling.
Why wouldn't we sit down now, set a budget, set a path to get us to a balanced budget?
House Republicans are demanding changes to the country's spending before they'll raise the debt ceiling. But the White House says that's non-negotiable.
This Congress has a basic set of obligations, and none more fundamental than maintaining the full faith and credit of the United States. And nobody should be putting on the table and even suggesting that that is up for debate or up for negotiation.
We pretty much always have some crypto conversation with you. I'm just curious, because I don't think we've talked to you since...
I think all that's been a waste of time, and why you guys waste any breath on it is totally beyond me.
Because you just think the whole thing just is
going to zero?
Going to zero and it's fake?
Bitcoin itself is a hyped up fraud. It's a pet rock.
You're back to that?
Yeah,
really?
Of course, yeah.
So what do you make then of BlackRock and other firms that are investing in infrastructure?
No, that's different. Blockchain is a technology ledger system that we use to move information. We've used it to do overnight repo, intraday repo. We've used it to move money.
Right.
So that is a ledger. That's a technology ledger type of thing that we think will be deployable. Remember, we've been talking about that for 12 years too, and very little's been done.
There's some tokens that I agree with you on, but Bitcoin's based on a distributed ledger.
Yeah,
it has all the characteristics of a store of value. It's immutable. It's scarce.
Totally untrue. It's
21 million.
Well, yeah, really. How do you know it's going to stop at 21 million?
Because
I've mentioned this to people
Satoshi.
Too. Everyone says that. Well, maybe it's going to get to 21 million, and Satoshi's picture is going to come up and laugh at you all and say, no.
There isn't a picture.
And by then, Satoshi will have taken out billions of dollars.
What was your reaction to the failure of FTX and all of that? You've seen lots of failures over the years of different things that have happened on Wall Street and the world of finance.
I'm not surprised at all.
And
I called it a decentralized Ponzi scheme. The hype around this thing has been extraordinary.
The underlying asset.
But you have a lot of clients who are involved.
You guys you've all seen the analysis on Tether and the analysis on all these things and the lack of disclosures, and it's outrageous. The regulators should have stopped this a long time ago. People have lost billions of dollars. Some are, if you look at it as lower income people, in some cases,
Jamie, there's a difference between saying
grandmothers.
FTX is a decentralized Ponzi scheme and saying that crypto itself is a Ponzi scheme. That's like, Madoff traded options.
Crypto itself, that doesn't do anything, is a pet rock. You're happy to
Bitcoin.
You can own it all you want.
I'm just talking. There's a lot. It's billions of dollars.
Guys, I don't care about Bitcoin, so we should drop the subject.
All right. Well, let me ask.
So, on September 12th, Jamie Dimon says Bitcoin is a fraud. He says he'll fire any one of his traders buying Bitcoin. Bitcoin drops 24%. When Jamie Dimon speaks, people listen. So that weekend, we found out that the largest buyer of a Bitcoin fund that's in Europe that buys physical Bitcoin, right? The largest buyer was Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan. And that's not illegal.
He says it's a fraud.
It says he'll fire anyone that buys it. Yes.
And at the same time, his company is buying it.
His company is buying it.
So it's just, I mean, so
It was a pyramid scheme. There's never been anything there. It serves no purpose. It's not a store of value. It's not a medium of exchange. And as we have seen, if you want it decentralized and not under government control, it is a haven for fraudsters. And now it is in the process of going to zero, except for Bitcoin, which will probably go negative, because if we're moving into a world with carbon taxes, you have to take into account the energy that it took to produce it in the first place.
Well, that's certainly playing out with like FTX.
Yeah.
Where you're finding out that
There'll be
it's a
more.
house of cards.
Yeah,
do you feel like that's just sort of opened the door for people to examine all of crypto now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like as soon as you have one of the big ones go down, it's just
and just go down catastrophically within a week.
Yeah, I mean, just there's no intrinsic value to this asset. And now it's starting to be priced appropriately. So it has what's Bitcoin at? 16,000? It has another 17,000 to go down.
Duh, really?
Yeah, there's no intrinsic value to this product.
And do you think that people have just inherently lost faith in the idea behind crypto because of FTX?
Well, it became an ideology, and whenever you invest based on an ideology, you're going to make some decisions that are a little divorced from math.
And what do you mean by ideology?
Well, the people who really like crypto are convinced that it's the currency of the future and that a decentralized ledger is the way to go, and that anything that is controlled by a government entity is by definition a negative, and if it's done by the private sector freely, it will be better. And that's just not how currency works. Currency is a method of exchange and a store of value. And for that, there has to be a degree of trust, and you have to have it managed in terms of volume. I mean, one of the craziest things about Bitcoin is that there will never be more